The overhead fluorescents burned too bright in the title company office, glaring off polished oak tables and glass walls as if they meant to expose every secret in the room. My fingers gripped the silver pen so tight that the ridges cut into my skin. The dotted line weighted my name, waiting to be written the final stroke of freedom I had saved a decade to achieve. One signature and the house would be mine. My first home. My escape. That was when the air changed. The door slammed open hard enough to rattle the framed license certificates on the wall. Carla. My stepmother's perfume arrived before her body suffocating, bitter as sharp as her voice. 55 years old, her red blazer strained against her chest hair, lacquered into a helmet. "Stop this farce!" she screeched. The words cracked like whips. "She doesn't deserve a house. She doesn't deserve anything." The title agent flinched but tried to calm her. My father Richard sat 2 chairs away, face, pale eyes darting like a trapped animal. He half rose, but Carla's hand shot out, nails biting into his arm. He shrank back, collapsing into silence. My father had once carried me on his shoulders at county fairs. Now he belonged to her, a man undone by years of gaslighting until his will wasn't his own. I steadied my breath and lowered the pen to paper. I would not let her take this moment. Not again. The agent's voice was hushed, trembling. "Go ahead, Laura. Sign here." I wrote the first curl of the L. My hand shook, but the ink bled black onto the parchment. A beginning. Carla's eyes widened and a sound rose from her throat. Half sob, half animal snarl. "If she signs, I lose everything!" Her purse swung forward. A flash of metal caught the light. Time fractured. The pistol looked small in her hand, but impossibly heavy in the air. She leveled it straight at me, the muzzle dark as a tunnel. My father gasped, "Carla, please," but his voice was the cry of a broken man. His body sagged, powerless. The blast came before I could breathe. The gunshot tore the sterile air to shreds. A burning punch slammed into my side. My body convulsed and the pen skittered from my hand. I collapsed forward half across the stack of mortgage contracts. Blood gushed hot, seeping into the paper, curling the edges. My name, half written, half erased, blurred beneath the red flood. It looked as though my very identity, my freedom, had been signed in blood. Screams filled the room. The title agent scrambled under the table, praying. A receptionist shrieked for 911. I tried to push myself upright, but the strength bled out with the crimson soaking the dotted lines. Then a chair screeched. A voice like a thunderclap rolled through the room. Enough. Judge Alan Whitaker. 68, tall as a mountain's shoulders, still broad beneath his gray suit. He had agreed to witness the signing of favor to my late mother's family. Now he rose like the law itself incarnate. His palm slammed against the blood-soaked contract, rattling the pen that still quivered on the page. "I saw it all," he thundered, his gavel voice echoing off glass. He pointed at Carla, the trimmer in his hand, not from fear, but fury. Cold-blooded, premeditated, attempted murder. Carla's arm wavered. The gun shook in her grasp. Her eyes darted, searching for control that no longer existed. "She was going to ruin me," she spat, but the words rang hollow, stripped bare by the truth standing before her. My father whimpered, hands twitching on the table, torn between 2 worlds. He opened his mouth to speak, but Carla's glare froze him again. Judge Whitaker didn't flinch. He stepped forward every inch the gavel brought to life. "Drop it, Carla, before the sirens outside become the sound of your life ending in a cell." And they were coming, the wail of police cars growing louder, closer, inevitable. I lay bleeding across my own contract breath, ragged vision blurring, but even through the haze, one thought cut sharp and merciless. She had shown her face at last. The stepmother who built her throne on control and lies had ripped off her mask in front of a judge, and this time justice had a front row seat. My name is Laura Mitchell, and long before blood stained a mortgage contract, my life had been written in the shadows of another woman's control. My mother died when I was 7. Her absence left a hollow in our small house, one that my father filled too quickly. Within a year, he remarried, bringing Carla into our lives. At first, she wore charm like a costume. Neighbors praised her for stepping in, for giving a grieving man and his daughter stability. But when the doors closed and the curtains drew, her true self emerged, sharp, relentless, always hungry for dominance. Carla understood the language of control better than anyone. She never struck me in public. Her cruelty was subtle, surgical. She told my father I was lazy, ungrateful, a burden. She whispered to me that my mother had died disappointed that I was the reason her heart gave out. I was too young to know gaslighting, but I knew shame. I carried it like a backpack filled with stones, heavy and unavoidable. My father, once the man who lifted me onto his shoulders to watch fireworks, began to shrink in her presence. If I spilled juice, she scolded me. He nodded. If I came home late from school, she grounded me. He enforced it. Soon, his voice was not his own. He repeated her words like scripture. Laura, you need discipline. Laura, you need to respect your stepmother. The house no longer belonged to us. It belonged to her. The years blurred into rituals of humiliation. She controlled the food I ate, the clothes I wore, even the friends I was allowed to see. When I turned 14, she decided I needed responsibility. She forced me to clean the house every Saturday from dawn until the floors gleamed. If I missed a spot, she would drag me by the arm, press my nose to the dust, and hiss, "Not good enough." Once, when I was 15, she smashed a porcelain dish on the counter and told my father I had broken it in anger. I hadn't touched it, but he believed her. He always did. He made me work at the local diner to repay the cost. The tips I earned went into Carla's pocket. By 17, I had bruises I couldn't explain to teachers. Once, she shoved me down the back steps for answering her too quickly. Another time, she locked me outside during a storm because I had forgotten to fold laundry. I pressed my face to the glass, watching her sip wine, while my father turned his face away, pretending not to see. There were brief moments of rebellion. When I graduated high school, I received a small scholarship to a community college. Carla tried to convince my father it was a waste, that I should stay home and learn to be useful. I remember standing on the porch that night, the acceptance letter crumpled in my hand, tears burning my cheeks as I shouted, "I am not yours to control." For the first time, she struck me across the face with an open hand. My father pulled her back, but not to protect me, to stop the neighbors from hearing. I worked double shifts, studied late nights, and saved every dollar I could. I wanted a place of my own walls, untouched by her perfume windows, unshuttered by her lies. But Carla was always one step behind. She stole money from my savings jar, told my father I was hiding drugs, even convinced him once to co-sign a loan in my name that I never saw a dime of. The debt hung around my neck for years like a noose. Still, I endured. I learned to record receipts, hide photocopies of checks, gather evidence quietly. I learned that my stepmother's greatest weapon wasn't her fists or her fury, it was her ability to twist truth until even my father doubted his own eyes. By the time I turned 30, I had one goal: left a house. Not a mansion, not luxury, just 4 walls that could not be stolen from me. I swore to myself that when the day came to sign the deed, I would not flinch. I would not let her name smother mine again. What I didn't know then was that Carla, desperate and cornered, would rather spill my blood than let me carve out a life she couldn't control. By the time I turned 21, I had learned that the only way to survive under Carla's roof was to fight back in silence. I could not win arguments. Every word I spoke was twisted. Every protest punished, every attempt at independence smothered under her red lacquered nails. So I kept my head down, worked shifts that stretched until dawn, and saved every crumpled dollar bill like it was a weapon I would one day draw. Dreams were my rebellion. While Carla told my father that I was worthless, that I'd never stand on my own, I pictured myself walking through a front door that belonged to me alone. No one else's name on the deed. No one else's shadow in the hallway. Just me and the quiet. A home not haunted by whispers and accusations. I started with pennies. My job at the diner paid little, but I tucked tips into an envelope taped beneath the floorboard in my tiny bedroom. When Carla rifled through my drawers, she found nothing. She thought she had stripped me bare, but she never found the envelope, never noticed the floorboard that squeaked slightly less than the others. Over time, the envelope thickened, became a box, then a small lockbox I hid at a friend's apartment. Each deposit was a secret victory. Carla hated what she could not see. She preferred evidence she could twist, receipts, grades, conversations she could manipulate. So I gave her nothing. I smiled when she demanded apologies, bowed my head when she called me a disappointment. but behind my eyes burned the knowledge that I was building something she could never touch. Still, her reach was long. More than once, she sabotaged me. When I was 24, I applied for a car loan to get to my second job. Denied. I discovered later Carla had opened a credit card in my name and maxed it out. My father signed the application, his signature shaky but present. When I confronted him, he lowered his gaze. "Your stepmother said it was for the household. We needed it." His voice was weak, like a man repeating a prayer he no longer believed in. I stopped expecting protection from him. He was not my father anymore. He was her echo. So I fought differently. I started recording. Every time Carla raised her voice, every time she accused me of stealing or lying, I pressed record on my phone. I collected copies of bank statements, photographed bruises, scanned emails she sent under my name. I became my own archivist of survival. The evidence was my shield, even if I could not yet wield it. At 28, exhausted from years of manipulation, I considered leaving the state altogether. But I knew Carla would follow not with her body, but with her poison. She had tied debts to my name, tangled my father deeper into her lies. Running would not untangle me. The only way out was through. So I kept working, office assistant by day, bartender by night. My body ached, but my savings grew. I learned the housing market like scripture memorizing, mortgage rates, and down payment requirements. I read about title companies' deeds, the exact steps I would take when the time came. Knowledge was my antidote to her lies. Carla sensed the shift. She would corner me in the kitchen, eyes sharp. "You think you're better than me? You think you'll escape? You'll never sign your name without mine on top of it." Her voice slithered around me, but I smiled. I didn't answer. Silence was my sharpest blade. And then, at 34, I saw it. A modest two-bedroom brick house on a quiet street. Nothing grand but solid, affordable, mine. I ran my hand across the for sale sign as if it were a promise. I knew Carla would try to stop me. I knew she would rage accuse, even drag my father in front of me like a chained dog. But what I did not know, what I could never have imagined, was that her desperation had ripened into violence. That the woman who once shoved me downstairs would one day stand in a title company, gun in hand, and decide that if she could not own me, she would erase me. Carla's fury grew in proportion to my progress. The more independence I carved for myself, the more desperate she became to claw it back. She was like a drowning woman pulling down everyone near her rather than accept the water had closed over her head. By the time I was 30, her tactics had moved past whispers and manipulation. They turned physical, brutal, undeniable. It began with smaller outbursts, each one a warning wrapped in cruelty. If I dared to come home late after a double shift, she would yank my purse from my shoulder, spill the contents across the floor, and accuse me of selling myself. If I bought groceries with my own paycheck, she would slap them off the counter, telling my father I had stolen household money. Every time he flinched but said nothing. His silence was an iron door. The night she broke a chair over my back, I realized her violence was no longer about discipline. It was about survival. I had come home exhausted, a bag of textbooks in my hand. She confronted me in the kitchen, eyes bloodshot, a glass of wine trembling between her fingers. "Where were you?" she hissed. "At work," I answered. "Liar!" She swung the chair so fast I didn't see it coming. The wood cracked against my ribs, white pain exploding through my chest. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. My father rushed in from the living room, his face ashen. He reached for me, but froze when Carla's voice lashed him like a whip. "Don't you dare touch her, Richard. She needs to learn." And he obeyed. He always obeyed. It was the neighbors who saved me that night. Mrs. Gonzalez from next door heard the crash and came running. She saw me crumpled on the floor, bruised and wheezing, and called 911 before Carla could stop her. The police arrived, notebooks ready, but Carla's performance was flawless. She wept, claimed I had stumbled into the chair during an argument. My father nodded, eyes downcast, confirming her lie. The officers left with little more than sympathetic looks. I was left with fractured ribs and a truth no one wanted to believe. That was when I understood the rules had changed. Words and quiet evidence would not save me anymore. Carla had shown she was willing to hurt me in ways that might not be reversible. If I wanted freedom, I would need something undeniable, public recorded, witnessed. Her violence escalated over the next year. She slammed doors inches from my face. hurled glasses at walls that shattered near my feet, shoved me against counters hard enough to leave bruises that bloomed purple and green. My father watched it all, his hands trembling, his mouth opening only to repeat her accusations. He told me once, voice quivering, "Laura, you make her angry. If you would just try harder." I looked at him then and saw not a father but a prisoner too far gone to save. But me, I refused to be broken. I saved hospital bills, tucked them into a growing folder of evidence. I snapped photos of bruises, emailed them to myself from secret accounts. And I started speaking to people who might believe me, co-workers, friends, even a professor who taught a class on domestic abuse. They told me what I had begun to suspect. This wasn't discipline, it wasn't family tension. It was a campaign of control, a calculated effort to erase me. One night, as I lay in bed, my ribs still aching, I whispered to the darkness, "You won't win. Not this time." The promise wasn't just to her, it was to myself. By then, I had nearly enough for a down payment. The dream of a house had hardened into a weapon. If I could get that deed in my name in front of witnesses, no amount of manipulation could erase it. Carla knew it too. That was why every time she looked at me, her eyes glittered with panic hidden under rage. She was losing her grip. I didn't yet know just how far she would go to keep control. But the sound of that chair cracking against my ribs stayed with me, a prophecy carved in splinters and pain. The next time she wouldn't settle for bruises. The next time she would reach for something far deadlier. The dream of freedom had carried me through long shifts and endless nights. But it was the bruises, the broken chair, and the lies that finally gave it shape. By 32, I knew I could not wait for miracles, or for my father to wake from his trance. If I wanted a life of my own, I would have to carve it out with my bare hands. The folder of evidence grew heavier by the month. Medical bills folded into neat stacks, photos of bruises, time-stamped audio recordings of Carla screaming, of her calling me worthless, of her threatening to throw me out on the street. I guarded that folder like it was a newborn hidden in a fireproof lockbox at my friend's apartment. It was proof not just of what she had done, but of who I was becoming, someone who prepared for battle. The savings I had hidden for years finally reached the number I had whispered to myself like a prayer. Enough for a down payment. Enough for the key to my own front door. My hands shook the day I saw the listing, a modest brick house on a quiet street. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. Nothing grand, but solid, real mine. I drove there 3 times in 1 week, parking across the street, staring at the for sale sign as if my name were already etched on it. I could almost see curtains in the windows, smell fresh paint, hear silence that belonged only to me. When I told my father, his eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in years, pride quickly smothered by fear. That's good, Laura," he whispered, but then Carla's shadow darkened the doorway. She laughed, a cold bark that froze the air. "A house. With what money? Whose name will be on the loan? Don't kid yourself. You'll never sign anything without me." My father opened his mouth to protest, but Carla's hand curled around his wrist nails, digging in until he winced. His words died. I saw it then clearer than ever. He was a puppet strings knotted tight around his neck, and she was the one pulling. I ignored her. I called the realtor. I filled out the mortgage application with trembling fingers. Weeks passed, like lifetimes, each phone call a mountain, each email a battlefield. And then approval. My name, my income, my credit, mine. The closing date was set at the title company downtown. I asked Judge Alan Whitaker to witness the signing. He was an old friend of my late mother's brother, a man who had known my family before Carla's poison seeped in. He agreed without hesitation. A young woman buying her first home, he said. That's worth protecting. When Carla found out, her rage was volcanic. She stormed into my room, tore clothes from hangers, shredded the letter of approval into confetti. "You think this makes you free. You think a piece of paper will save you. If you walk into that office, you walk into your grave." I stared at her, chest pounding, but voice steady. "Then dig the hole yourself, because I'm signing." For the first time, she faltered. Her eyes narrowed, the mask cracking. She could see it. My resolve had calcified into something unbreakable, and that terrified her. The days leading up to closing were a blur of nerves and determination. I worked, I packed, I prayed. I slept with the folder of evidence by my side, as if its weight could keep me safe. I knew Carla would try something, but I thought it would be another lie, another sabotage, maybe even dragging my father into the office to humiliate me. I underestimated her, because Carla had already decided the same thing I had, that this house was the end of her control. And if she couldn't stop the ink from drying on that contract, she would stop my heart from beating before my name was ever complete. The morning of the closing felt like waking on the edge of a battlefield. I rose before dawn, the sky outside my apartment, pale gray streaked with the first light of day. My hands trembled as I brewed coffee not from caffeine, but from the weight of what the next few hours meant. Today, I would take back my life line by line, signature by signature. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blouse and pressed slacks, nothing ostentatious but strong professional. A woman who owned her choices. I clipped my folder of evidence into my briefcase not because I planned to use it, but because carrying it made me feel armored. Each receipt, each photograph, each recording was a bulletproof vest against Carla's lies. When I arrived at the title company, the air smelled of toner and fresh paper. The receptionist smiled politely, unaware of the storm gathering beyond the glass doors. The room itself was bright walls lined with framed certificates, polished oak table gleaming beneath the fluorescence. Contracts waited in neat stacks, pens aligned like soldiers. I sat at the head of the table, my father and Judge Whitaker taking seats nearby. My father looked haggard, shoulders hunched, eyes darting as if he feared the very walls might betray him. He gave me a wan smile that never reached his eyes. "You sure about this, Laura?" he asked softly, his voice hoarse. "Yes," I answered without hesitation, "more sure than I've ever been." He nodded, but his gaze flicked to the door, and I knew who haunted his thoughts. Judge Whitaker, in contrast, radiated calm authority. He adjusted his glasses, reviewing the documents with a sharp eye. "All seems in order," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had spent decades commanding silence in a courtroom. "Once you sign, it's yours." The title agent entered, then a woman with a neat bun and clipped efficient tone. "All right, Ms. Mitchell," she said, sliding the papers toward me. "We'll start with the deed of trust. Just sign here, here, and here." My hand hovered over the first line, heart pounding, when the sound came a slam, the kind that rattled the glass in its frame. The door swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Carla! Her heels cracked against the floor, each step like a warning shot. She wore her red blazer, the one she always chose when she wanted to dominate a room. Her lipstick was too bright, her eyes too sharp. Behind her, the receptionist hovered helplessly, phone in hand, but Carla brushed her off with a wave that might as well have been a blade. "You can't do this." Carla's voice sliced through the quiet like shattered glass. "This is fraud. This is theft." She slapped a manicured hand against the stack of papers, scattering them. My father flinched as though the air itself had struck him. "Carla," Judge Whitaker said firmly, rising half an inch from his chair, "this is a legal proceeding. You will sit down or you will leave." Carla laughed, a high, jagged sound that made the hairs on my neck rise. "Legal. Nothing about this is legal. This girl, this parasite has been bleeding us dry for years. And you?" She spat at my father. "You've let her. You've been too weak to stop her, so I will." My pen trembled in my hand, but I forced it down to the page. I wrote the first letter of my name, L, and felt fire flood my veins. One signature stood between me and freedom. "Stop!" Carla shrieked, voice cracking with desperation. Her purse swung up, and I saw the glint before I understood. The gun. Compact silver, deadly. She pulled it free in one fluid motion, her hand steady in a way that froze the blood in my veins. The title agent screamed and ducked. My father shot up halfway from his chair, but Carla's glare pinned him back down. For one suspended heartbeat, the world held its breath. I had never seen my stepmother look so calm, so resolved. "If you sign that paper," she said, voice low, "you sign my death, and I will take yours first." My breath caught. The judge's chair scraped back. My father's lips moved soundlessly. Then the gun roared. The gunshot split the air like lightning, cracking open the sky. For a fraction of a second, there was no sound at all, only the heat searing into my side as if the bullet had carried fire inside it. Then the world rushed back in screams, shouts, the clatter of chairs. I gasped and fell forward, the pen flying from my hand. My body hit the oak table hard enough to rattle the stack of contracts. Pain tore through me, blinding, relentless, spreading in waves. I clutched at my side, but my fingers came away slick red, unrecognizable as my own blood. It poured across the paper in front of me, a dark river, soaking the deed of trust. My name, half scrawled the L and A, complete. The rest unfinished, blurred under the crimson flood. The contract drank my life, each line curling as the ink ran into scarlet. I tried to breathe, but every inhale was a knife. The fluorescent lights above flickered too bright, too cruel. The room tilted, and for one terrifying moment, I thought I would slip entirely into blackness. "Laura!" My father's voice cracked the sound of a man torn in half. He surged forward, but Carla snapped her head toward him, the gun still in her hand, her eyes blazing with something more than rage, something closer to triumph. "Sit down, Richard," she barked, and he froze mid-step, trembling, his fists clenching uselessly at his sides. That was when the judge moved. His chair scraped against the floor, a sharp, decisive sound. Judge Alan Whitaker loomed over the table, his face carved into fury, the kind of fury that comes not from shock, but from witnessing too much injustice to remain silent. His hand slammed down onto the blood-soaked papers, rattling the pen that still quivered there. "Enough!" His voice thundered through the office, shaking the air, making Carla flinch. "I saw it all, every damn second. This was no accident. This was no defense. This was attempted murder in cold blood." The title agent whimpered under the desk. The receptionist sobbed into her phone, shouting for the police. But all I could see was the judge's face eyes blazing, pointing straight at Carla like a gavel striking down. "You've manipulated this man, his daughter, this family for years," Whitaker roared, stepping forward. "But not here, not in front of me, not with the law sitting in this room." Carla's arm wavered. The gun shook in her grip. Her mask of control cracked at the edges, lips curling back, voice shrill. She was going to destroy me. She was stealing him from me. She was signing her own home. The judge spat. "And you chose violence. Do you know what that means, Carla? It means prison walls and iron bars. It means the end of your lies." Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder, closer. My vision dimmed, but I clung to the sound, a lifeline threading through the haze. My father collapsed into his chair, face in his hands. He shook his head over and over as if denial could erase what had just unfolded. But even he could not silence the echo of the judge's fury. Carla backed a step toward the wall gun still raised, but hands trembling now. "No," she whispered half to herself. "No, no, I won't lose everything." "You already have Whitaker," said his voice low and deadly certain. The sirens stopped outside. Doors slammed. Heavy boots pounded against tile. A command shouted from the hallway. "Drop the weapon." Carla's eyes darted wildly. For the first time, fear flickered through her features. Her hand shook the gun, rattling in the air. She looked at my father, desperate. "Richard, tell them she attacked me." My father looked up, his face wet with tears. For the first time in years, he met her eyes and didn't move, didn't nod, didn't lie. He just sat in silence. That silence was louder than any accusation. The door burst open. Officers surged inside, weapons drawn, commands sharp. Carla hesitated, and for a heartbeat I thought she might fire again. But then the judge's voice cut through the final hammer. "Drop it, Carla. I promise you this, every second you resist will be another nail in your coffin." And then, at last, her fingers uncurled. The gun clattered to the floor. My body sagged, the world narrowing into darkness. But as I slipped under one thought, seared itself into me this time, her lies had not saved her. This time, justice had watched with open eyes. I woke to the sharp sting of antiseptic and the steady beep of a monitor at my bedside. The world returned in fragments, bright hospital lights burning against my eyelids. The ache in my side pulsing with every shallow breath, the weight of tubes and wires tethering me to life. For a moment, I thought I was still at the title company sprawled across the oak table, but the smell of bleach and the hum of machines told me otherwise. I was alive, barely. The door creaked open. My father entered first, shoulders slumped, face-pale guilt carved into every line. Behind him came Carla, astonishingly composed, her arm looped through his as though she were guiding a frail patient instead of a broken man. Her eyes found me instantly, lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Laura!" she cooed, her voice dripping with false concern. "We've been so worried. You frightened us all." I opened my mouth, but my throat was raw, each word a scrape of glass. "You shot me." My father winced. Carla squeezed his arm tighter and laughed, soft, dismissive, like I had made a child's mistake. "You poor thing. The shock must have scrambled your memory. You lunged at me, remember? You tried to grab my purse in anger and the gun went off. A terrible accident." "No," I rasped. "Judge Whittaker saw Alan." She tilted her head, her smile sharpening, an old man confused by chaos. "He'll realize soon enough that he misinterpreted everything." My chest tightened, not just from pain, but from the certainty in her tone. She wasn't just spinning lies for me, she had a plan. And the confirmation came hours later when a nurse rolled in a television so I could watch the local news. The screen flickered and there she was, Carla outside the hospital, crocodile tears sliding past immaculate makeup. Cameras swarmed as she spoke, her voice trembling just enough to sell the act. "It was all so fast," she told reporters. "My stepdaughter has always struggled with outbursts. She attacked me in the title office. I only reached into my purse to call 911 and somehow the gun went off. I never meant for anyone to be hurt. Please pray for her recovery." The chyron beneath her face read "Stepmother claims shooting was tragic accident." I wanted to scream. Every syllable was a dagger twisting in my gut. But worse was the camera angle that panned briefly to my father standing just behind her, head bowed, nodding faintly as if agreeing. His silence was her greatest weapon. When the report ended, I lay back against the pillow, fury and despair warring inside me. If she won the narrative now, if she convinced the world that I was unstable, everything I had endured, every bruise, every scar would be washed away in her performance. But I wasn't helpless, not anymore. When the nurse returned, I whispered hoarsely, "My bag, where is it?" She fetched it from a drawer, and with trembling hands I pulled out my phone. The lock screen was smeared with dried blood, but it still lit up. I scrolled to the folder I had hidden deep within photos of Bruce's audio clips of Carla's Rage's hospital bills scanned and dated. Evidence she couldn't spin away. I sent them to Judge Whittaker first. My message was simple: don't let her win. Minutes later, his reply came. "Rest, Laura. I'll handle this." Justice doesn't blink. Relief washed through me, though fear lingered at the edges. Because if Carla realized I had evidence, she would try harder than ever to silence me. That night, as the machines beeped steadily at my side, I made a vow. She had stolen my childhood, twisted my father into a shadow, and nearly ended my life. But this time I had proof, and proof was louder than her lies. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and dust, the air thick with anticipation. Rows of benches were packed neighbors, co-workers, even strangers who had seen the news and wanted to watch justice unfold. Reporters filled the back cameras at the ready. My wound was still healing, each step a tug against stitches, but I stood straighter than I had in years as I entered, flanked by my attorney and Judge Whittaker, who walked with the measured certainty of a man who had already seen the truth. At the defense table sat Carla Pristine in a navy suit, hair smoothed into a glossy helmet, hands folded demurely. She looked every inch the wronged woman, the grieving wife, the misunderstood stepmother. My father sat behind her shoulders, bowed eyes fixed on the floor. He couldn't meet mine. When the bailiff called the court to order, the judge presiding took his seat, robes sweeping the dais. "This court will hear the case of State versus Carla Mitchell on charges of attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and obstruction of justice." Carla's attorney rose first, spinning his tail with oily precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not what the prosecution would have you believe. My client, a respected woman in her community, was assaulted by her stepdaughter, a young woman with a history of instability. In the chaos, a firearm discharged accidentally. Tragic, yes. Criminal, absolutely not." He gestured toward me as if I were the intruder, the liar, the problem. I clenched my fists, nails biting into my palms, but I did not bow my head, not anymore. The prosecutor rose, her tone sharp as glass. "The defense would like you to believe this was an accident. We will prove it was anything but. We will show you evidence of years of abuse, of manipulation, of control, and we will show you a witness who saw everything." She called Judge Whittaker to the stand. The room hushed as he took the oath, his voice steady, unwavering. He described the events at the title company in meticulous detail: how Carla had stormed in, how she had drawn the weapon, how she had aimed and fired as I signed my name. His words struck like hammers, each syllable pinning Carla tighter to the truth she could no longer escape. "Were you uncertain about what you witnessed?" the prosecutor asked. "Not for a moment," Whitaker replied. His eyes never left Carla. "I have spent my life weighing testimony. I know when someone acts with intent." Carla Mitchell intended to kill her stepdaughter that day. The defense scrambled, trying to paint him as biased, too old, too emotional. But then came the evidence. My attorney wheeled in a monitor. The screen lit up with photos, my arms mottled with bruises, my face-swollen hospital records stamped with dates. Audio clips played Carla's voice, shrill and venomous, calling me useless, threatening to ruin me, vowing I would never have a life of my own. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Carla shifted in her chair, her composure cracking. Her attorney objected, but the judge overruled, letting each piece of proof land like another stone in the pile, burying her. Then the moment I hadn't expected, my father was called to the stand. He walked slowly, trembling, his hands clasped. At first, his answers were hesitant, evasive. He muttered about confusion, about chaos. But then the prosecutor pressed harder. "Mr. Mitchell, did you ever witness your wife abuse your daughter?" Silence stretched. Carla's eyes drilled into him, her nails gripping the table. And then finally he broke. "Yes," he whispered. The word cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. "I saw it. For years, I let it happen." Gasps erupted. Carla surged to her feet. "You coward!" she shrieked, her mask shattering. "You pathetic, spineless man! After everything I did for you!" "Order!" the judge barked, gavel slamming. Carla's voice echoed shrill, desperate, and for the first time, everyone saw her for what she truly was. The prosecutor turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, the lies have ended. The evidence is here. The witness testimony is clear. This was no accident. This was attempted murder." The jury's faces were carved from stone. Carla slumped back into her chair, shaking her head, her power evaporating in the silence that followed. I sat tall, pain still pulsing in my side, but for the first time in my life, the weight on my chest was gone. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. It was out in the open, undeniable, irreversible. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. To some, that might have seemed long. To me, it was the blink of an eye compared to the decades I had spent suffocating under Carla's control. When the bailiff announced they had reached a verdict, the air in the courtroom grew taut, stretched so thin it felt like one word could shatter it. My palms were damp, my stitches ached, but I kept my spine straight. My father sat several benches behind me, his face pale, drained, hollow. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, like the years of silence had finally consumed him. The jurors filed back in, solemn, their expressions carved from stone. The forewoman, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that held no pity, stood with the folded paper in her hands. In the case of State versus Carla Mitchell, she began, her voice unwavering. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts: attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and obstruction of justice." The words slammed through the room like thunder. A wave of murmurs rolled across the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, flashes from cameras briefly igniting the tense air. Carla shot to her feet. "No!" she screamed, her voice cracking into a shriek. "This is wrong. She provoked me. She's always provoked me." Her attorney tugged at her sleeve, whispering frantically, but she tore away, her face twisted with rage. "You can't do this to me. I kept this family together. I sacrificed everything." "Order!" The judge's gavel crashed down sharp and final. His eyes, cold and clear, pinned her in place. "Mrs. Mitchell, you will remain silent." She trembled, chest heaving, but the fight drained from her as deputies closed in their hands, firm on her arms. The judge cleared his throat, his voice carrying the weight of the law. "Carla Mitchell, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. Your actions were not an accident, not a mistake, but a deliberate attempt to take a life and to pervert justice. You aimed a weapon at your stepdaughter in a place of law and contract, a place meant for truth and order. Such betrayal cannot go unanswered." His gaze swept the room, landing on me briefly before returning to Carla. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. Gasps erupted again. Carla's knees buckled, and for a moment she looked at my father, eyes wide, pleading, desperate. But he didn't move, didn't stand, didn't speak. He just stared at her hollow and silent as the deputies fastened the cuffs around her wrists. No, she howled again, the sound feral echoing against the courtroom's high ceilings. Richard, tell them! Tell them! I didn't mean it! But Richard lowered his head into his hands. He said nothing. The deputies pulled her toward the door, her heels screeching against the floor, her cries fading as the heavy door swung shut behind her. For the first time in my life, silence felt like safety. The judge's gavel struck one final time. This court is adjourned. People surged to their feet, reporters rushing for the exits to file their stories, murmurs filling the chamber. My attorney squeezed my hand. Judge Whitaker gave me a firm nod, one soldier of the law acknowledging another survivor of battle. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My side throbbed, my body weak, but my spirit stood unbroken. I turned and met my father's eyes. For once, he didn't look away. His lips parted, but no words came, only tears. He tried to stand, faltered, then sank back down again. I left him there because his choices had chained him to Carla's lies for too long. My freedom no longer depended on his strength. As I stepped into the sunlight outside, cameras flashed, microphones thrust toward me, voices shouting questions. I raised a hand not to silence them, but to steady myself. I had nothing left to hide. Carla was gone. The verdict was mine. And for the first time in decades, the future was wide open. Freedom didn't arrive quietly. It came with headlines, with flashing cameras, with whispers that trailed me everywhere I went. For weeks after the verdict, my face was on every local news broadcast, my story dissected in online forums and opinion columns. Some people called me brave. Others called me a liar. Carla may have been behind bars, but her reach hadn't ended at the prison gates. Her sisters, her cousins, her friends, people who had only ever known her, polished smile and carefully crafted persona, took to social media with venom. She never would have done this if Laura hadn't provoked her. That girl always wanted to drive them apart. This was all about money. Don't be fooled. Posts piled up, threads spun wild theories. One evening, my phone buzzed nonstop with alerts. A blog had published a full article claiming I'd staged the attack to frame my stepmother. They even used doctored photos, an image of me laughing at a friend's barbecue spliced beside the headline, "Is this the face of a victim?" My chest clenched as I scrolled, each lie heavier than the last. They wanted me broken. They wanted the jury's decision reversed in the court of public opinion. But I had something stronger than their noise, the truth. Judge Whitaker had warned me. He came to see me 1 week after sentencing, his tall frame filling my modest living room. "They will try to rewrite what happened," he said, voice firm. "Let them. Evidence doesn't blink. You don't need to answer every rumor. The record is clear." Still, silence wasn't easy. Each slander felt like salt poured into wounds that had barely begun to heal. My father, fragile and ashamed, retreated further into himself, too weak to stand against the tide. It was me alone facing the storm. Until one evening my phone rang. It was Denise, the attorney who had stood by me in court. Her voice was sharp, reassuring. "Laura, listen to me. Don't engage. Let them talk themselves out. We'll answer with facts when it matters. And when they push too far, when they step into defamation, we'll be ready." Her certainty anchored me. Days later, the opportunity came. A national morning show requested an interview, not with Carla's family, not with anonymous sources, but with me. They wanted my voice, my side. For the first time, I wasn't cornered. I was invited. The studio lights were hot, the cameras merciless. The host leaned forward, her tone careful. "Laura, there are those who say you provoked your stepmother, that this was a family disagreement gone too far. What do you say to them?" I inhaled slowly. The memory of blood spreading across the contract burned in my mind. I pictured Carla's shriek, the jury's verdict, the judge's thunderous voice. "I say I lived it," I answered, my voice steady. "I say no rumor, no spin, no smear campaign will change the fact that a jury saw the evidence and rendered their judgment. I didn't provoke violence. I survived it. And I'll keep surviving no matter what anyone says." The interview aired the next morning. Clips went viral, shared by strangers who saw themselves in my words. Messages poured in from survivors of abuse, women, men, people who had been silenced by family politics and manipulation. They wrote, "You gave me courage. You made me feel less alone." For the first time, the tide shifted. Carla's allies still shouted, but their voices thinned under the weight of truth spoken openly without shame. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once eaten in silence under Carla's glare. The house was quiet, my house now. I traced the grain of the wood steady and real beneath my fingers. Carla had tried to silence me with a bullet. Her family had tried to erase me with lies. But I was still here, breathing, living, free. And their noise it would fade, the verdict would not. The house smelled of fresh paint and cedar the day I finally moved my boxes in. Not Carla's house, not my father's, mine. The deed bore only my name. The ink still crisp on the page. For weeks, I had woken each morning half expecting someone to burst through the door to tell me it wasn't real, that freedom had strings attached. But no one came. The silence was my own. The first thing I did was change every lock. The second was pack away the last remnants of Carla's shadow. Old furniture, chipped dishes, photographs where her smile beamed like a warning. I donated it all. I wanted no echoes of her voice in these walls. Therapy became my compass. My counselor, Leah, was a woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and eyes that never flinched when I spoke of bruises or fear. Week after week, I peeled back layers of silence, of gaslighting, of guilt I had carried for years. "You were a child," she reminded me once firmly. "It was never your job to protect your father from her. It was never your fault she chose violence." Those words loosened a knot I hadn't even known lived inside my chest. Finances came next. Carla had always manipulated money, locking accounts, hiding bills, making me feel like survival depended on her whims. No more. With Denise, my attorney, I untangled myself from every joint tie, revoked every power of attorney, closed every card with my name attached. My father begged once, his voice weak over the phone. "Laura, she handled everything. I don't know how to manage without you." I answered softly but firmly, "Dad, you'll have to learn. I can't live my life being managed by someone else's mistakes." The line went quiet. For once, his silence wasn't my burden to carry. I found strength in unexpected places. Neighbors brought casseroles and flowers when they heard pieces of my story. Former coworkers stopped by saying I wish I had spoken up sooner. One evening at a community center, I shared my testimony to a circle of strangers, women and men who had lived their own private wars at home. When I finished, a woman pressed my hand and whispered, "You gave me the courage to file for a restraining order." That moment mattered more than any headline. In time, the smear campaign fizzled. Carla's family grew quiet. Their posts ignored their words, drowned out by the permanence of a court record and the clarity of evidence. She was no longer a specter haunting my days. She was an inmate, her voice limited to the walls that now caged her. I planted a small garden in the backyard, tomatoes, basil, roses. Each morning, I stepped barefoot into the grass, breathing an air that no longer smelled of antiseptic or fear. The scar on my side tugged when I bent, a reminder of how close I had come to being erased. But instead of shame, I felt resolve. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch with a notebook in my lap. I wrote down everything: the hospital beeps, the courtroom gasps, my father's whispered confession, Carla's shrieks, Whitaker's steady vow. Justice doesn't blink. And beneath it I scribbled my own vow. Silence ends here. That became the name of the nonprofit I founded months later. Silence Ends Here. A group for survivors, a place where stories could be told without shame, where resources flowed without judgment. At the first meeting, a dozen people gathered. By the third, the room overflowed. I stood at the front, my scar hidden beneath my blouse, my voice steady as I told them, family isn't always blood. Sometimes family is the people who believe you, who stand with you when the world tries to erase you. You are not alone, and you never will be again. Applause filled the room, but it wasn't for me. It was for each of them, for every voice rising against the weight of silence. As I locked the center that night, stars pricked the sky above my head. I thought of Carla, of her control of the years stolen, and then I let the thought drift away, swallowed by the night. I was free. Not just on paper, not just in court, free in my bones, in my breath, in the home that was mine. And I knew my story had begun with a gunshot, but it would never end there.